Good morning, everyone, and thank you very much, Chris, for your kind introduction. First of all, I would like to thank Chris and Alessio, and of course our Thai hosts for their very generous hospitality. It's a real pleasure to be here. I understand that I'm a stranger, more or less, to this crowd because I'm an academic. You're all avid runners, people who run events, who earn your living on the ground. And I'm here in my capacity as an academic to tell you something about running events, which perhaps you would doubt. The topic of my presentation, the social impact of running events. And I remember when Sepp Coe, the head of World Athletics, was chair of the London Organizing Committee of the Olympic Games, he was asked repeatedly what was the most challenging issue facing the organizing committee. And do you know what his response was? It was the why question. Why we're doing this? In other words, he was referring to the impact of the Olympic Games at the time. And I'm really pleased that finally we talk about the social impacts, the impacts of events. I mean, this is the ultimate purpose, the reason for events to exist in the first place. Unfortunately, we haven't really paid enough attention to this particular issue. And purely by chance, my talk today coincides with the publication of our book, Running Events, Policies, Marketing and Impact. And you can find some flyers on the desk later on and during the coffee breaks. And if you're interested, we can have a chat about this. And I emphasize, this is purely by chance. But this book is essentially based on a study of a number of running events across Europe and China and the United States, and brings together a number of lessons about the relationship between policies, marketing, and impact. And I would like to emphasize that impacts that we're talking about are the end product of a long chain of deliberations and events. So they don't happen by chance. Impacts are always, inevitably, they're planned and they're deliberate. So of all questions in the world, I decided to start off with the most obvious one. So what are running events? And perhaps, again, I'll be the last person to tell you what running events are. However, I would like to offer perhaps a slightly different interpretation of this question. Running events have been absolutely fundamental, or running has been absolutely fundamental for human survival. All of you will be familiar with the history of running, and you would know that running has transformed human beings from being hunted to become hunters. And running has performed a number of different functions, not only functions, but also has always had symbolic meaning. And if we go back to the history and ancient times, you will recall perhaps the ancient Egyptian Set Festival, which was steeped with symbolism. And the heart of the symbolism was running. So the pharaoh had to run 4 laps to demonstrate his renewed vigor and his leadership qualities and his ability to regenerate the nation. So from the very, very beginning, running has always been associated with some functional properties and some symbolic properties. So by definition, running is, we can think of running both as a mirror, because it reflects who we are as society. Running has emerged as a result of religious traditions, cultural festivals, symbolism, and it always represents the existing order, social order. But that's not the only way to think about running. Running has always serves as a model, because if you think about some of the more recent running events, they have emerged as a challenge, as an opposition to the existing order. And in fact, the mass running, as we are now familiar with, has emerged precisely because of the resistance and against the what some authors call the Fordism of the athletic track, the bureaucracy, the regimental rules that tend to shape and govern the running on tracks. So it's important to keep this in mind, that running events serve both as mirrors of who we are, but also they serve as a model of what we would like our society, our community, our sport to look like. And I would like to refer very briefly to an interesting quote from one of the most sophisticated analysts of running and academic writer who approached running from an anthropological perspective. John Bell, who used to say that public events are locations of communications that convey participants into the version of social order in relatively coherent ways. And this is precisely what running does. When we bring together people, regardless of the type of event, this is what running does. Running, of course, is multimodal, which means that it can take all sorts of different forms. It can be spontaneous, it can be very regimental and organized, it can be aerobic, anaerobic, it can be competitive. It may take many different forms. And all of these forms, they have implications for the actual impacts of the running events. In addition to that, running is always purposeful. Regardless of whether we're talking about a marathon or the park run, people's motivation will always be central. Why people participate in running events will always be a central question. Running, of course, is contested, has always been. I've already referred to the tension, the challenges between running within the stadium and the mass running participation events in the outdoors, in the open. So this was one of the first clashes, but this was not the only one. Running was also contested on gender, on equality grounds. You will remember the history of women's participation in the marathon. They were not admitted until 1972 to participate in marathon. The same goes for the injuries, of course. And I recall the words of the famous Dr. Kenneth Cooper, the author of the Cooper test, who opinioned many years ago that everyone who runs for more than 15 minutes a day doesn't do this for health reasons. So running has always been contested. We need to keep this in mind. And running, of course, is manufactured. It is the second technology after walking, which uses human agencies in order to condense time and space into something small, a version of social life, which is small and easy to understand. And if you just think for a moment of the kind of social events we organize, or running events we organize, they always represent social construction of the world in which we live in. And the marathon on Sunday here will be another example of this particular understanding of running. Running impacts of running events are, of course, closely related to the key characteristics of the events. And this is just an example of one way of which we can think about running events. So it's important to understand the relationship between the ownership of the event, the organizers, who is in charge. Sometimes the owner will be the organizers, but very often it will be a different agency, which of course adds to the complexity of organizing the event. Whether the event is certified or not, the form of the event, whether it serves as a mirror or a model of the social order, the access to the event, whether it's paid or free access. Parkrun, for example, is a free event, but many other events require admission fee. The function, the level, locality, frequency, all these are important characteristics of the running events. And when you put them together, you arrive at a picture of the running event, which will then determine more or less the social impact of this event. The second key aspect which determines the nature of social impacts of running event is, of course, the political dimension. And yesterday we heard from representatives in governments about the role of local authorities and public authorities in general in promoting, supporting running events. And it's very important to recognize that there is this interplay between the key actors involved in organizing a running event, such as, for example, either public authorities or a National Athletic Federation or other agencies, sponsors, for example. We need to keep in mind that all of them, they have different interests, And as we heard from the previous speaker, from Tom, they have struggled big time in securing collaboration with different partners. Why? Precisely because of the different interests each party tries to promote. And of course, the key beneficiaries. Yes, we organize an event, but we need to understand who will be the key beneficiaries. So understanding the political dimension of running events is very important. Political dimension is also important because it shapes the vision of the impact. And then the question becomes, whose vision of the social impact we need to pay attention to or to promote? So this is why taking into account the political dimension is absolutely critical. And then we have, of course, the marketing dimension. I'm not going to dwell too much on the marketing because there will be speakers after me that will specifically address this issue. But for marketing, again, it's critical to bring together the visions of impact with, of course, the interests and the nature of the event, so you can design and deliver coherent message that will resonate with different participants and different stakeholders involved in the event. And of course, finally, we arrive at social impact. So what are running events impact, which of course represents the gist of my presentation. Running impacts of events are, in a way, form of a public audit, if you'd like, of what has been proclaimed and as a result of staging the event and what was actually achieved. So all of you who organize events, you will make a claim that by putting together the marathon, for example, we will bring diverse group together, we will promote health and fitness, we will, for example, enhance social cohesion. You can make all sorts of different claims. But the question, impacts, the role of impacts is to actually capture to what extent those promises have actually been delivered. My own background, academic background and professional background has been, I've been involved for many years in studying social impacts of big events and the Olympics in particular. We delivered a number of projects for the International Olympic Committee to that end. And our understanding of the impact, social impact, is that it's an emerging combination. Impact is not something you capture at the end of the event. Impacts are always an emerging combination of attributes, of processes and technologies. And I will talk a little bit about each of these three elements in a minute. So this is the global picture of impact, social impact. First of all, you have the running event, whatever the shape, the format, the nature of the running event. And the ultimate purpose of this event is to create public value. So public value is a critical term in understanding social impact, and it represents a relationship, an exchange between a valuing object, which is the event, running event, and valuing subjects. In other words, the people who are involved or somehow concerned or affected by the event. So it's an exchange, it's a relationship, which is based on interactions. Interactions is a key word here, which we need to understand. So we may organize the most splendid event, the most spectacular event, which of course will bring together a number of participants, but if we don't engage, if we don't somehow motivate those people to get them interested, to get involved in not just with the event, but in the range of auxiliary events around the major running event, then the social impact of our event will be rather minimal. Then the next question is, and this has been referred to on many occasions yesterday and to different conversation, community, public, which is fine, but this is not a simple term to define. I mean, who is the public? Yes, we talk about the relationship that social impacts represent the relationship between the event, the valuing object, and the valuing subject, which is the public. But who is the public? And yesterday, a reference was made to public authorities and different communities. But from a public authorities point of view, you can have a number of different interpretations of the public. Public authorities think of the public, first of all, as citizens. Then they can think of the public as voters. They can think of the public as clients, people who receive services from the local authorities or the public sector in general. And then, if you talk to marketeers, they will use a very different terminology. They will talk about customers. For them, participants are customers. Different target groups are customers. So this is not an easy question or puzzle to resolve. But as event organizers, as promoters, we need to be absolutely clear as to who is the public that we're targeting. And as I mentioned, our book is based on the study of about 12 different events across 6 European countries. And we really struggle, apart from maybe 2 or 3 events, we really struggle to identify the identity of different events, because most events will promote themselves as being everything to everybody. Okay, we are open, we're inclusive, we welcome children, obviously people in advanced age, we welcome people with disabilities, we welcome avid runners, which is fine, but this then dilutes the message, and you cannot promise the same benefits to all participants. After all, social impacts are notoriously difficult to capture because they represent a promise for future benefits, which are intangible. It's difficult to quantify. How do you quantify self-confidence? How do you quantify increased national pride or pride of your local community or sense of self-worth, for example? These are notoriously difficult items to quantify. So this is why it's absolutely central that we understand and shape the identity of the event. So this event can then be projected, can be promoted to the right audiences. And impacts, in terms of capturing the impact, I'm very pleased that over the yesterday there's been a lot of talk about evidence, and research. And this is something which we know from personal experience has been a challenging topic of conversation between academics and practitioners. Practitioners don't really have time for a lot of this research, and they sometimes are a bit skeptical about what academics can deliver, can help in this regard. But research here is absolutely critical. And a reference was made yesterday, and a lot of reference was made about insights and data. But all those insights and data that we're referring to is rather static. And although, for example, capturing data from participants in terms of age, number, gender, maybe education would help to a certain extent, this will not going to produce the qualitative insights you really need that reflect participants' motivation, their experiences of the event, their vision about or understanding about the interactions, because public value that I have mentioned previously as being central to understanding social impact is in the eye of the beholder. The key question which each participant and stakeholder in any event would ask is, what's in it for me? Why am I taking part in this event? And this is why being able to capture the meaning which people attach to an event and their responses to this event, their willingness to engage, to further engage with this event and to be part of the community which is shaped around this event becomes absolutely critical. Impacts, again, are very difficult to capture, but not impossible, of course. And there are plenty of examples, successful examples of capturing social and economic impacts of the event. It's also dangerous to talk about social and economic impacts in separation, because inevitably these are interrelated. Social impacts are influenced by economic development and vice versa. Economic development influences perceptions and social impacts. Qatar, for example, has been hugely criticized for spending $200 billion for staging the World Cup, which of course is not quite right, because they didn't invest $200 billion in the World Cup per se, rather in changing the country. And when you talk to people, you really understand that they appreciate the change which this investment, economic investment, has made to their lives, which is at the center of our discussion anyway. Running events don't have this capacity. They don't have this mobilizing capacity to mobilize huge resources. But nonetheless, regardless of their scale, small, national, international, they always deliver impacts. I'm conscious of the time, and I would like to leave a few minutes for any questions, either now or later on today. Thank you very much for your attention. I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Icon.